I don't think backpacking has to be expensive, but winter gear can come with a higher price tag because to truly enjoy the trip, you've got to stay warm, especially at night and even when conditions are a little more wintry than
There you
you
go.
may have anticipated. One critical piece of gear in your loadout is your sleeping bag. I've talked before about my go-to 0-degree sleeping bag, the Paria Thermodown Zero, and I'll include a link to that bag below because although it has its flaws, it's a fantastic bag and comes in at about $180, which honestly isn't too bad for a solid 0-degree bag. But my question today is, can you get a 0-degree sleeping bag for $100? You see them all over Amazon and other places, but are they any good? In searching, I found a few that seemed worthy to actually try out because although price is important, I do have a few other criteria. Let me tell you what those are. First, no cotton. Too many budget sleeping bags use cotton fill, and it's just not a good idea for any backpacking sleeping bag, and maybe especially winter, where you'll be dealing with lower temperatures and likely more moisture. Any sleeping bag I would consider had to either be down or, more likely in this price range, some sort of synthetic fill. My second rule was that the sleeping bag had to weigh less than 4 pounds. There are some really warm sleeping bags out there that will work great in very low temperatures, but they weigh a ton. So, for a backpacking sleeping bag, I needed something that weighed less than 4 pounds. And third, it's got to keep me warm down to at least freezing temperatures. I know winter is different depending on where you live. You may just barely get down to freezing, you may get well below freezing. I wanted to find a bag that would keep me warm down to freezing temperatures with minimal base layers and other things so that if temperatures then get a little bit lower, I can do some other things to make sure I stay warm when temperatures dip lower than I expect. Now, obviously, I won't know whether the sleeping bag will keep me warm down to those temperatures until I actually try it. So, I'm gonna have to trust the manufacturer's temperature ratings and then go from there. Unfortunately, manufacturers can really put any kind of temperature rating on their bag, so it's not something you want to just trust outright. We'll talk more about temperature ratings in a minute when we walk through the 2 sleeping bags that I found that met these criteria. I was a little surprised that based on those 3 criteria, I was actually only able to find 2 sleeping bags worth considering on Amazon. The first is the Hyke Byke Katahdin 0-degree with synthetic fill. The second is the Teton Sports Altos 0-degree synthetic. Both of these bags do come with an option to get actual down fill, but in order to maintain that $100 price range, we had to go for the synthetic insulation. I paid about $110 for both of these bags, but the Teton Sports is actually currently just below $90. The Katahdin from Hyke Byke uses their 625 fill power equivalent cluster loft synthetic down for insulation with a DWR coated 20D ripstop nylon on the outside as well as on the inside. And I have to say I'm impressed with the feel of this synthetic down and the way it lofts up. Theoretically, you're giving up a little bit of weight with a synthetic down, but this one comes in at a very reasonable 3 pounds 9 ounces. You can get it in a duck and goose down version, and they're only a few ounces lighter at 3 pounds 6 ounces and 3 pounds 2 ounces. So to save quite a bit of money and get a synthetic down option only costs you 7 ounces, but saves you probably $100 or more. When I put this one on my scale, it comes in at 3 pounds 9 ounces. So right at what Hyke Byke says that it will. The stuffed sack weighs 2.7 ounces, which means without that, you'd come in at about 3 pounds, just over 6 ounces. Now, I know down is the best of the best when it comes to a warmth to weight ratio as well as compressibility. But since we're going for a budget price range and this bag is for colder weather, I don't mind adding a few ounces of weight for a synthetic down that will dry fast and perform better in wet conditions and also save me some cash. One great thing about this bag is that it comes in 3 different sizes, one for up to 5 feet 6 inches, the next size is for those up to 6 feet tall, that's what I got, and the next is for people up to 6 feet 6 inches. I'll tell you that I am 6 feet tall with a slightly wider build, and this bag felt like a really good fit. It didn't feel like it was too tight on my head, which I was worried about since it said it was for those up to 6 feet tall. You can also get 2 or 3 different colors. Amazon usually only has 2, but the Hyke Byke website has 3. Not all of the colors and size combinations are in stock. I went for the gray regular because that's what they had in stock. As far as temperature ratings go, Hyke Byke gives the Katahdin 0-degree a comfort rating of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, a comfort limit of 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and an extreme or survival limit of 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's pause for a minute and talk about temperature ratings. Hyke Byke does rate their sleeping bags according to ISO standard testing protocol. This is important because sleeping bag companies can get pretty loose with their temperature ratings. They can really put whatever rating they feel like on their sleeping bags. Just like this one that says it's a 0 degree Fahrenheit bag, you'll notice that was the extreme or survival rating, not the comfort rating. As a quick reminder, ISO standards give a comfort, transition, and extreme rating. Basically, comfort means you're warm without even trying. Transition means you're able to stay warm but have to work at it by curling up in your sleeping bag. And extreme means you definitely feel cold. Your bag should only be used in this range in an emergency. Personally, I will never take a sleeping bag out if the forecasted temperature is below the comfort rating, because that gives me a little bit of buffer if things get colder than I expect. Now, a couple other features that are great for a cold weather bag and make a big difference. First of all, the draft collar around the shoulders. It has this extra fabric and insulation in here, and that's really to help block draft from coming up out of the bag past your shoulders. The second is drawstrings. There's one right here around the collar of the sleeping bag. Again, that can help lock in that warm air that your body is producing and keep it inside the sleeping bag, as well as a drawstring around that draft collar. Both of those can make a really big difference in colder temperatures. The Hyke Byke also has a draft guard all along this zipper. So that will prevent you from losing warm air out of that long zipper that actually on the Hyke Byke, I appreciate, goes almost all the way down to the feet. These are YKK zippers. They work really, really well, as you can see. I also like that the Hyke Byke zipper, you can unzip it from the bottom, which means in warmer weather, if you want to, you can kick a foot out without unzipping all of this from your shoulders down to your waist. That's one way that I really like to temperature regulate, whether I'm sleeping at home or backpacking. So I really like that feature where I can unzip it from the bottom. And while I don't usually sleep this way, the Hyke Byke is made big enough so if you want to, you can fit a pillow inside the hood. This is my Teton Sports Camp pillow. You see that fits in there really nicely. That way you're not chasing it around your pad all night. The other thing that's nice is it has an integrated phone pocket right here in the draft collar. It's Velcro. Unfortunately, it's not very big. Here's my phone, it's an iPhone 14. That fits in there, but just barely, and I really have to work at it. In fact, I can't even get the Velcro to close. So while there is a phone pocket, I don't know what phone is gonna fit in there. Maybe your old flip phone from the early 2000s. It might be handy for maybe your water filter or a power bank or something like that, but I wouldn't keep my phone in there. And one last thing I'll mention before we move on to the Teton is I have to say how much I appreciate the baffling construction on this Hyke Byke Katahdin. If you've seen other sleeping bags that have a lot of insulation or a lot of down in them, you're probably used to seeing them kind of lumpy, where there's these mountains of down and then a bit of a valley where there's the seam. But if you look at the baffling construction on this Hyke Byke, it's nice and smooth. They've constructed the baffles in a way that you don't have those big mounds of down and then valleys, and that's important because it's on those seams or in those valleys of down where you can lose a lot of warm air in your sleeping bag. With this baffling construction, it's a nice even layer of down all the way from head to toe, and you don't lose nearly as much warm air. So just a small detail about the Hyke Byke Katahdin 0 degree Fahrenheit that I really appreciate. That's enough of this one. Let's move on to the Teton Sports Altos 0. All right, let's talk about the Teton Sports Altos 0 degree synthetic version. Now, I have to admit, right out of the gate, I am absolutely a fan of Teton Sports products. There's pillows from Teton Sports, I have several packs from Teton Sports, and other items as well. I really like Teton Sports. They strike a good balance of quality gear at budget prices. Love their stuff. I'm hoping this sleeping bag is the same way. This bag also uses a synthetic insulation, but it's different than the Hyke Byke that we already talked about. They use what they call a microfiber batting. If you've ever seen those big rolls of white stuff that goes into quilts, it's that same idea. Basically a sheet of synthetic stuff that is supposed to loft up and keep you warm. Now, you can probably tell if you compare this shot to the one with the Hyke Byke, this one does not look like it lofts up nearly as much as the Hyke Byke. and that's because it doesn't. That synthetic batting is not lofting up nearly as much as the synthetic down in the last sleeping bag that we looked at. With that said, one advantage to this type of insulation is that it's not susceptible to what we call down migration, because rather than being made up of a bunch of tiny little feather-like pieces of insulation, this is just one sheet that they roll out and it stays in place. So you don't have to worry about hot or cold spots if there's a batting type insulation like in the Teton Sports Altos. I also can't see on the information either on Amazon or the Teton Sports website that this 20D ripstop nylon shell has a DWR coating, which is a bit of a disappointment. It's probably not a big deal if you're always planning to be in the tent, and Teton Sports does make sure to mention that the insulation is water resistant, but I'm still disappointed because a DWR coating really seems like industry standard at this point. And without that coating, you're susceptible to moisture getting through the shell and into the insulation, which you do not want, especially in a 0-degree bag. As far as the weight, the Teton Sports Altos is listed at 3 pounds 8 ounces, just 1 ounce lighter than the Hyke Byke that we just talked about. On my scale, it comes in at about 3 pounds 2 ounces. The stuff sack does weigh 5.7 ounces, which means without the stuff sack, the sleeping bag would actually come in at sub 3 pounds. Now, that might sound like a good thing, but I'm a little bit surprised that it doesn't match the advertised weight of 3 pounds 9 ounces. That tells me that they may have even shorted on the insulation, which would not be a good thing for a 0-degree bag. Unlike the Hyke Byke, the Teton Sports does only come in one color, which I'll call "You'll Never Be Able to Lose Me" orange, and also just one size. As I mentioned earlier, I am about 6 feet tall. The height on this bag seemed just about right. But I have to say, when I climbed into the bag, I felt a little bit like I was being tied down. I've never been in a sleeping bag that felt as tight as this one did. I am a little bit wider, but I didn't love it when I first climbed into the bag. I will say once I got used to it, I was able to get to sleep just fine, but it just felt different. I didn't love it. As far as the temperature ratings, the Teton gives itself a rating of 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which, if I'm honest, I think is a bold claim for this sleeping bag. As I tried to determine whether or not this was the comfort or extreme rating, I found this comment from Teton Sports on several of their different sleeping bags. When considering a sleeping bag for snow capping, it's important to understand its temperature rating. Our sleeping bags feature an extreme rating, but for comfort, we advise adding an extra 20 to 30 degrees to the listed temperature rating. For example, a bag rated at 0 degrees Fahrenheit should be treated comfortable and warm around 30 degrees. Their comment goes on, but not really important for our purposes. So 0 degrees Fahrenheit is the extreme rating, and we should add 20 to 30 degrees to get the comfort rating. None of these ratings are determined under the ISO standardized criteria. It's Teton rating their own bags. Remember what I said about sleeping bag companies being able to advertise ratings that may not reflect the best use for that bag. Example A right here. The Teton does have some similar features to the Hyke Byke, including an integrated draft collar. It does also have cinch cords on both the, that's hard to use, draft collar, as well as the hood. Also hard to use. It does have a draft guard all along this zipper. It's slightly less substantial than the Hyke Byke, but I don't know that that would make much of a difference. The zipper does go pretty far down, and you are also able to unzip from the bottom, just like the Hyke Byke. So if that's important to you, the sleeping bag has both of those features. The Teton Sports does also have an integrated phone pocket. I do like the placement of this one a little bit more. It would lay sort of on your chest as you're sleeping, but again, it's not very big. If I try to put my phone in here, I have to work at it. It will go in, but that's about all I can put in there. This one is a little bit bigger than the Hyke Byke, but not much. Honestly, I may be able to use that for my phone, but I would probably put my power bank or water filter or something else in there. So that's it for the Teton Sports Altos 0 degree. Let's talk about what it was actually like to sleep in both the Teton Sports Altos as well as the Hyke Byke Katahdin. After I got the sleeping bags, I laid both of them out for at least 48 hours so they could decompress from being stored in their compression sacks for so long in storage. I also made sure to set up the sleep system and tent outside at least 5 to 6 hours in advance of crawling into them for sleep. As far as the sleep system I used, it's exactly what you're looking at right here. I've got my Paria Recharge XL on top of my Thermarest Z-Lite. This is my favorite winter sleeping pad combination. And then my pillow system here This is the Gear Doctor's inflatable pillow. I love that it straps to the pad. This is my Teton Sports camp pillow. This is my favorite way to sleep in winter. It's comfortable, it's warm, and I did the exact same thing when I slept in both sleeping bags. I also made sure that I wore the exact same thing each night. My thinner base layers from 32 degrees and some socks. I did make sure to have some gloves and a hat on hand in case I woke up cold, but I wanted to start without those to really test these sleeping bags and see how they kept me warm without those additional items. As I like to do, I also put a ThermoWorks Thermodrop outside, as well as one in the tent and one in my sleeping bag. I'll put a link to this tiny little thermometer in the comments. I love clipping it to my backpack and taking a few with me on each trip. It's just fun to know what the temperature is. The first sleeping bag I tested was the Hyke Byke Katahdin 0 degree. When I went to bed that night, it was 31 degrees Fahrenheit outside. In the tent, it said it was 32 degrees. Because the tent had been set up for so long, it's probably just a difference in the thermometer readings, but right at or right under freezing when I went to bed. I climbed in my sleeping bag, put in the thermometer sensor as well as a thermodrop so I could see what the temperature was inside the sleeping bag, and then went to sleep. At about 3:15 a.m., I woke up a little bit chilly, but I had sort of anticipated this because, again, I was only wearing a very thin base layer and socks, no gloves, no hat. So I put on my hat and gloves that I had right there ready and then went back to sleep, no problem. I woke up again at about 5:50. I checked the temperatures inside my sleeping bag. They were 83 degrees Fahrenheit, nice and toasty, and the white thermometer that had the sensor inside my bag was reading at 87. Now, it definitely wasn't that warm everywhere in my sleeping bag, otherwise I'd be sweating to death, but they were probably sort of next to my body. That's why they were reading that high, but I can tell you I felt warm and the readings were high. When I checked the temperature outside, it was below freezing at 29 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the tent, those thermometers were reading at either 41 degrees Fahrenheit at the bottom of the tent or 45 degrees Fahrenheit at the top of the tent. And that's pretty typical just because of your body heat and the slight layer of insulation that your tent gives. It is going to be a little bit warmer inside your tent than outside. So the fact that it did get below freezing outside and I was nice and warm inside, especially when I put on that hat and gloves, tells me that this sleeping bag is properly rated with a comfort rating of 32 degrees. It also tells me that I could probably take this sleeping bag even colder than that if I took either a warmer base layer, started with my gloves and hat on, and was willing to maybe put my puffy coat or something else inside the sleeping bag to help add additional layers of insulation. As I said before, I try not to plan on doing those things. Those are things that I do if temperatures dip lower than expected. So, Katahdin Hyke Byke 0 degree bag, I have no problem taking that out if the forecasted temperature is at freezing, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's talk about the Teton Altos. Admittedly, of the 2 nights I had to test, I saved the Teton for the slightly warmer night because just based on my initial impressions of how little that synthetic batting lofted up, I was really nervous about whether or not the Teton Altos would keep me as warm as the Hyke Byke. When I went to bed, the temperature was actually 37 degrees Fahrenheit, so 5 to 6 degrees warmer than the previous night when I slept in the Hyke Byke. I woke up at around 2 a.m., felt a little chilly, similar to my experience with the Hyke Byke, so far I was fairly encouraged because my experience was the same. I put on my hat and gloves, still felt a little bit chilly after laying there for 10 or 15 minutes trying to get back to sleep. So then I cinched up the hood around my face as well as the draft collar to really try to make sure none of the warm air I'm generating inside of the sleeping bag escapes out of that hole. I was able to get back to sleep. I woke up again at around 6 a.m. just before and checked the temperature outside. The temperature never got below freezing. It was 36 degrees Fahrenheit, so just went down 1 degree from the time I went to bed. It never got below freezing, but I was cold, which surprised me and really disappointed me because the rating it gives itself, so it's advertised as a 0 degree Fahrenheit bag. They tell us in the comments that that's the extreme of their survival rating. Hyke Byke does the same thing. I'm not going to hold that against Teton Sports. They say the comfort rating is 20 to 30 degrees higher than that, which should take me to 20 degrees Fahrenheit or at least 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is below freezing. The temperature on this test only got down to 37 degrees and I was cold, which was just so disappointing because I do love Teton Sports products, but that tells me that I definitely should not take the Teton Sports Altos out if the forecasted temperature is down to freezing. I would probably only take this bag out if the temperature was forecasted to get no lower than 40 degrees Fahrenheit. If the forecasted temperature is below 40 degrees, I am not taking the Teton Sports Altos on my backpacking trip. I just can't trust it. So if you only have $100 to spend and you want a sleeping bag that will take you down to freezing, I do want to say that neither of these bags will take you down to the advertised temperature rating of 0 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the survival rating. But if you want to get down to freezing temperatures, I would definitely pick the Hyke Byke Katahdin 0 degree over the Teton Altos 0 degree. For me, there was just no comparison as far as which one is going to actually keep me warm in those freezing temperatures. For $100, that's the way to go. Now, if you want to spend a little bit more, I would recommend the Paria Thermodown Zero. If you want to check out a video where I talked about that one, I'll put a link to that right here. And until next time, get out there, get your dose of dirt, and remember, life is better with some dirt in it.